not there to being almost herself. I mean, 95% back. Memories, articulation.
A medication that actually reverses Alzheimer's.
Yes, it didn't just stop it. And I heard that it was irreversible.
Yeah.
Simply maybe a little, they could slow it down or something.
Yeah.
And I was so happy. I sent them to a couple of guys.
And I was thrilled because the doctor who prescribed that medication is a member of the Kaiser program, which is my provider. So that's a blessing.
That's good. Hello, Bob.
Send it to me too, will you?
Hello, Frank Taylor. Frank Taylor coming online momentarily.
Great.
Send it to me, will you, Fred? Will you, Ned?
Absolutely.
Thank
Absolutely.
you very
much. In fact, what I've gotten. Hi, Frank. How are you?
Hi, Frank.
Good afternoon.
I've got a picture of the vial that contains the meds, and I'll just send it to you so that you can see the correct name of it and the doctor that prescribed. Although I guess that doesn't matter when you're in Boston.
Well, of course, it's another thing if the pharmaceutical company charges $2 million per dose.
I don't know that. No, John. This is a couple with means, but now they're thinking of traveling the world and taking this lady who told me about it, who's their caretaker. I'm talking, Frank, about a medicine that was administered to a woman diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And over a 3-month period, her memory came back to the point almost where she was several years ago. So it's really hopeful.
Hello, guys.
Hello, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hi. There was a little change in flight from Boston to San Francisco for my family, so I picked up about 45 minutes, so I'll be with you for a little while.
Bravo.
Nice to be here, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Be nice to
Be anywhere for me.
Really?
Well, you're always somewhere until you know what. Then
That's right.
Nice too.
Right. So how's the weather up north, Bob?
Here it's morning, June gloom, January.
Down here too.
It's my daughter came in from LA late last night. She said it was raining in Pasadena earlier in the day. The strangest of weathers.
Well, the
June
forecast
gloom.
for today, and I looked at it about an hour ago, so it may have changed, but it was overcast until about 2, then sunny until 4, and 40% chance of thunderstorms.
Oh my.
5, and then sunny after 5.
Isn't that something?
That's
So we'll
weird.
see how that
I
plays
have
out.
to say, I spent a couple hours watching golf on TV yesterday because the US Open is being played here at LA Country Club.
LA Country Club, which was my neighbor when I was pastor in Beverly Hills. Horrible place.
Well, when I worked in Century City, so it wasn't far away.
Yeah.
You weren't Tom and the LA I was between the two of you, kind of.
Yeah.
Between the church and the country club.
Well, two fellows tied for first on the, it's a 4-day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 2 guys tied at 8 under for the first day, which has never happened before.
8?
And they're saying the course is in such incredibly good shape that the scores are going to be high.
There was even a hole-in-one in the news, John.
There were two holes in one.
There were, I knew about one. I must have missed the second one. Not a golfer, am I?
I'm not a golfer either, but I watched the last, I'm sorry, John.
Go.
I last the last 2 or 3 holes of the Canadian Open. Did
Oh,
anyone see
yeah.
that?
Yeah,
was
what
incredible.
a great,
Hi, Gary.
great ending.
Gary,
Good morning. Good
Gary, we
morning.
thought you'd be down here at the US Open.
No, I had 2 funerals this week and a little doctor stuff. I got a little thing on my nose they burned off. I don't think they burned off the nose. I think they just burned off the thing.
Well, the nose is still there.
I'll find out. And the guy said it's precancerous, so in a month he'll look at it, and if they have to biopsy it, they'll take off the nose or whatever they do.
I thought the Irish had the block on those, Gary.
You know, I have Italian skin, but I think this looked like acne to me. It looked like a zit, and but I don't know what it is. At the age of 80, who cares anymore? I don't know. But I saw that the closing of that the Canadian Open was spectacular
Yeah, it was.
at the end. And now the U.S. Open, and I sat up last night and watched a lot of it. I was busy. I played golf yesterday. Not quite U.S. Open caliber, though. So,
And where do you play when you go?
there's a course here in Petaluma called Rooster Run, and I play with a couple of guys, some guys from the parish.
Good name.
I play old man's golf now. I mean, if I hit a great drive, it goes 180 yards. So that's old man's golf. I don't know what else to say.
Uh-huh.
But anyway.
I thought you were going to say, if I hit the ball.
Oh no, I do hit
You
it.
could still hit the ball. 180 yards sounds pretty good to me. And if that's a really good drive, well,
Bob.
I played it once. in the
Pros
past.
hit their drives 350.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at a hole and it's a 350-yard hole, and I say a pro hits the green.
They do, yeah.
Drive.
Amazing.
I heard recently, someone told me, in fact, that they're looking into limiting how far you can drive a ball because the major golf courses are designed
Yeah,
to only accommodate you driving it so far.
exactly.
And if, in fact, they didn't have some restriction in the not too distant future, they'd have to redesign them, and there's no land.
There's no land. No.
Such terrible problems for the world, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I know. But Bob Bernat, how did the conference go?
I wasn't there. Down in San Diego, you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't go down this year.
Oh, you didn't go. Oh,
No, I didn't go. Yeah. So we'll wait and see what came out of it.
well, I told my friend Tony McGuire to look you up.
What was that?
There you are.
Well, he looked in vain.
you must be still looking.
Well, I think Norm was planning to go.
Yeah, I think Norm should have been there.
If he comes on, we'll get a detailed report, hopefully.
Did anyone see the nuncios talk to the bishops?
No.
No.
I read a little bit about it.
I didn't see the actual talk, but there was an extensive article, I think in NPR today.
Hey,
And he focused on the synod, which of course they didn't,
No.
and
right.
on focusing on the Eucharist with a mission,
Mm.
not the Eucharist, not a static view of the Eucharist, I guess is how you put it.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm getting more and more upset with Barron because every time he advertises his damned book,
$2 book.
yeah, he basically prefaces it with "This is a spiritual disaster." You know,
Oh, yeah.
3/4 of the Catholics in the United States don't believe in the real presence. And, you know, all based on that one utterly stupid Pew report,
Yeah,
but
Well, in the
based
comment
on a
of,
misreading of it, I should say.
yeah, yeah.
You know, a lot of reasons why the church in the United States is in a state of disaster. But I think that people answered one question versus the other on 5 years ago on that Pew survey. I don't think that is indicative of our state of the church in the United States.
Oh.
I hope not.
I mentioned at the end last week that my friend Bill Justice, and I, after talk to him, he was considering going down to the I guess Corleone had a big mass for Corpus Christi on Saturday, and you know, about the Eucharist or whatever it was, and like I say, in the downstairs basement they had a number of exhibits, or what do you want to call it, but one of them was on the Eucharistic miracles.
Mm.
You know, the focus on, you know, whether, you know, the bleeding, you know, hosts and stuff like that, which shows kind of, you know, the perspective that these guys have. I
Yeah,
think you got it right. The static approach to the Eucharist.
there's an exhibit, I think, of those that goes around the country, if I'm not mistaken,
Mm,
of those Eucharistic miracles.
it
I
must-
had a terrible experience. A friend of mine asked me to preach in his parish, and so I went and I preached, and I talked along the lines of Father Camelli's article that I think you sent us, Ned,
Mhm.
in America on the Eucharist.
that
Lou
was-
Camelli was a year behind Bob and George and I in Rome, and he's very good. And so then my friend, who's kind of I thought he said there was going to be a procession. I thought it was going to be in the beginning so that they could come to the church celebrating the main event. But it turned out the procession was after the mass,
Oh,
and they went out and they processed and they came back and had benediction. And
yeah. Well,
I mean, it was the
That's
most
the way it should be.
screwed up stuff. You know, he's an Anglophile. He pulled out a cope. You know how I say that King Charles's congregation, the liturgy was overcoped. He pulled out a cope that made me feel like I was in Westminster Abbey. But the distortion, for example, of the centrality of the Eucharist is something that just totally escaped. I have to write him an email about it because it totally escaped him. It was saying, for example, now we got the mass out of the way. Let's do the real.
yeah,
right.
Frank, I have to make a comment on that because the liturgical directives are very clear that Eucharistic processions should derive from the Mass. And Eucharistic adoration should derive from the Mass. So it does, you know, it's pretty clear that a Eucharistic procession should be following the Mass using the host that is consecrated at the Mass.
Yeah.
And that it comes
But
from.
then should it have benediction when they come back?
Yeah, you can. You can.
I think that's total distortion. Whatever the liturgical guys say, I think it's.
No, I'm sorry, but to have a
Attaboy, Frank.
Eucharistic procession before the Mass is a distortion.
Well, if you have benediction, but if you don't, then you're coming to the main event.
Yeah, but the main event really is designed, if you will, to start from scratch. In other words, unconsecrated bread and wine. And then the adoration
Yeah, well,
follows upon the celebration of the Mass and the reception of the Eucharist. So that, in a sense, if properly speaking, the adoration, the procession and the adoration continue the, let's say, prolong the event of communion. You know, particularly when then you consider that everybody in that procession is, or should be, nourished by the body of Christ. And now they are celebrating that with the procession. So the theology of it is good.
Frank, I'm curious,
Sorry.
is there room for the homilist to be almost like a narrator? If you think about the modern day world, that this event goes on for, let's say, an hour and a half or 2 hours, it might serve well to have the homilist speak early, middle, and late, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess my issue is, recognizing that Tom knows more about this in terms of, what is being suggested about it. I'm giving my reaction to what happened. And my reaction is that the procession and all of that surrounded it after the Mass detracted from the centrality of the Mass and its fundamental effort at gathering people together.
Well,
So can I put it back to Tom Welber?
I will not disagree with you on that, because the Mass could be simply, well, it's done. Now we're going to have this really, really great special procession.
And that's exactly what Frank's saying.
Yeah, but the way that it should be done is that it should all be seen as one continuous movement.
And then, Tom, at the very end, they should say, now that we have done all this, now that we have celebrated the Eucharist, now that we have focused on the presence of the Lord in the Eucharist, and we've been fed, and now go
in peace.
live out what we've just celebrated here.
Just like,
Thank you, Gary.
there's
Should be, yeah.
There's an analog there to the funeral Mass. The funeral Mass that has the rite of final commendation and farewell does not end with a blessing and does not end with a dismissal, but ends with, let us take the remains of our brother or sister to their final resting place. And then after the committal comes the dismissal.
Yeah.
So again,
the major difference being that in ordinary circumstances, that you're right. The procession, if you will, from the church to the grave is not accompanied by the kind of accoutrements that could send the message that this is what's really happening, rather than that's what we just got through.
well, that's true. The procession often doesn't happen. Now, in George's funeral, for example, there was a definite procession. The connection, and I kind of admired this, the connection between the funeral Mass and the committal was liturgically alive for the people who celebrated. Now, what the bishop did, of course, was to say, now let's take the remains of our brother George to their final resting place, and then he blessed and dismissed the people.
He
But-
did. I remember that, yeah.
But
I don't have any problem with that on the funeral, or if there's another purpose. For example, if from Mass you're taking the Eucharist to the sick,
yeah,
in having a way of connecting that, as long as it's clear that the Eucharistic celebration was the main thing, it builds community, and we're going out to build more community.
Exactly.
right.
And I think this, in some ways, distracted for it, but not entirely, because I was surprised at how many people participated.
But the connection does need to be made clear. Just like actually there's a procession on Holy Thursday night,
Right.
where the connection between the Mass and the procession and the reservation in the altar of repose
Right.
is liturgically very clear. So too, whoever plans that liturgy does need to be sure that that connection is
Yes.
alive. And in a sense, it's a symbolic way of bringing the Eucharistic presence out into the world that we are seeking to transform by our Eucharistic lives.
And the liturgical action itself makes that connection much clearer, I think, than what I experienced. I
Yeah,
mean, there's a flow in that liturgy.
right. And there should be, anytime you and I suspect if you look at the rubrics, if you will, for the Corpus Christi procession,
Right.
That it attempts to make that connection clear of the
Okay.
procession, continuing being closely connected to the celebration of the Eucharist. The logic of having the logic of having procession first, and then we get that over and done with, and now we'll tack mass on the end, is not quite what I think the church is after. Sort of like, do you remember in the old days there were some convents of nuns when you went to say mass in their private chapel, they would ask for communion first so that they could use the mass as their time of thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
I can remember that.
But it seems to me there's a certain sense that it's what you can do with what you're given. And it seems to me if you have a procession before and you don't plan benediction, and the emphasis is that in this procession, we are going now to celebrate the core of all of our Eucharistic practice. And that, and that's the whole reason we're out. We're showing the world that we have a place to go where, in fact, eternity meets time. And therein is the core of our Eucharistic practice.
Yeah.
And so if the procession is geared to doing that, I have a little, that's why I've said, I'd rather it in the beginning rather than the end.
But I really don't think that should be a Eucharistic procession. I think there's reason for procession to the place of celebrating the Eucharist. That's not a problem, like the procession of palms. But, what we're doing is showing the world that what we have just done is for you. And if that's clear, if the homilists were
clued in.
We're actually if the homilists were actually part of the preparation for that, he could also, make a point that, you could make that connection in the homily.
Right.
I also would like just to make a little comment about Johnny's observation. I have always maintained from a liturgical principle point of view that the homily should not be seen as simply something that the priest or homilist does after the gospel. I mean, that is the privileged place for it, but I think there's a homiletic dimension to just what John was saying, to pulling the people along throughout the celebration of the Eucharist by appropriate commentary. That too, to me, seems like a part of a homiletic function.
I don't completely buy that. I think we got enough verbalism as is in the liturgy.
Well,
I may disagree a little bit, Frank.
We've got excessive verbalism.
I guess I'm in that mode today. Actually, this is just peach tea. It's nothing else. But
I worked so many years with learning disabilities and challenged people. I'm just convinced that the majority of our community are short attention span folks, and that part of our task is to help them stay in that focus. I think that's what triggered my comment, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, and the comments during the Mass need to be succinct and very purposeful. The only purpose for them is, what can I say that can help people enter into this mystery as it is, this part of the mystery as it's being celebrated now. Now, the other thing that is woefully lacking, which I hope we all can agree on, is silence.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What you can say sometimes to help them enter into the mystery is nothing.
And-
Sometimes, yeah,
You took the words right. You took
Yes.
you took the words right out of my mouth, because I
Yeah.
was going to say one of the things I appreciate about going to the little urban monastery here in the Berkeley Hills, Camaldoli Benedictine, during the week is how silence is such an integral part. And they even have to, as this past week, we had visitors who were students at the Jesuit school as part of the GTU, and it was their first time at the monastery, and so one of the monks beforehand, they actually had a little rehearsal of the singing of the Psalms. This is Vesper Eucharist on Wednesday, and so just to practice some of them, they're beautiful, the Gelano Psalm tones,
Mhm.
and then also just said, and we slow way down here. So most of the time at the end of prayer, there's a very quick response. We pause and slowly then make the
Mhm.
appropriate response. And silence. It's so different from the weekend Sunday worship that I go to in a local parish, because it's a parish where I do home visitation, nursing home, communion ministry, and just I think it's important to be there and show the flag. But for all practical purposes, the celebration is not a celebration for the most part.
Yeah.
And
And of
that's
course,
very
another point is that the presider is the leader of that silence. You know, the model for silence is the collect prayer. Let us pray. And then let the people pray, goddammit. And then the collect prayer itself is to be a summary of that prayer.
Not commenced words.
yes,
Yeah, you're not suggesting we say that. That's
No,
not
I'm
a commentary.
suggesting that we demonstrated that you know, we
Yeah,
are
don't hold
still
back, Tom.
presiding. We are still presiding when we're not talking.
Yes, that's true.
And that's why when there's moments of silence, like after the reading and whatnot, you know, the presider should not be fumbling with something or gazing around the, you know, trying to see where the empty spaces are or who's properly dressed and who's not in the assembly. So anyway.
Gary, you've been quite quiet in the background here. You're very active in ministry. How about your take on this?
Well, I'm retired, but I'm thinking,
That calls for another cup of coffee.
no, but I mean, I think I've been a good presider. I use a homily really to reflect on the scripture. I never really thought too much about, you know, there's that one little sense where you then lead people back into the celebration of the Eucharist. I've always forgotten that part. I'm working on how the scripture affects their life, and then what, you know, somehow or other, how it affects their life. And I always forget to put in. So now we will, you know, the Lord will be present here. And the deacon, our deacon, Jim Carr, used to always do that. And in just a few short moments, I forget how we would do it, but he would tie the homily to the actual celebration. I always forgot to do that. I was still focused on trying to connect with their life. But no, I don't. I'm retired. Although I have mass tomorrow, Sunday morning. There's a community of people down in Marin County, and a lot of them have gone through Cursillo over the years. And there's a place called St. Vincent School for Boys. It used to be an orphanage, and it's got a chapel, very old fashioned but very pretty chapel. And about 200 or 300 of them gather there, and they had a priest saying mass there every Sunday from the Archdiocese of San Francisco, who died, a guy named Harry Schlitt. And
Oh, I know Harry.
yeah,
know, Harry.
Yeah,
When-
he
You
died.
know him, we all know him, right?
You all
Fred?
know Harry?
Yeah, yeah, I knew Harry.
Read
When
his
did he-
book.
when did he die?
He died on Thanksgiving Day.
Oh,
I
yeah.
never knew him. I know he was what they call the God Squad. I mean, he was a very hip kind of guy in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And he was actually the chancellor or vicar general, one of the vicar generals of the Archdiocese. And he, for the last number of years, was saying Mass there and did a bunch of other things there too. And but he died on Thanksgiving Day. And then I remember I got a call from a guy who plays music there asking, and that's when I first heard about this community. And I remember going to celebrate Mass there, and I was just, it was a great experience. I mean, it would be the epitome of what we all want to see in a celebration, because I mean, for me as a presider, I'm energized by the people. I mean,
Yeah.
it really, you really experience what it means when everybody is there and I mean, they respond and they sing. And you know, and when you're preaching, they are listening. You could just tell. They're
Super.
listening. And there's this two-way thing that's going on. Well, I'm always looking forward to presiding there, and I have to work. I had to work on a homily. I told them, I said, the one thing you're shaking me out of my retirement lethargy, where I can read the scriptures without having to figure out what to say about them. Now I have to go back to that. But so what we're talking about, I'm interested in this, and the other contrast, and we've talked about this 1,000 times now, is to see the young clergy. The Mass is their private prayer. I mean, in some ways, it seems to me, for some of them, it's just like, you're welcome to sit in, but it's my private prayer, you know. I mean, and they say nothing outside of whatever the little, you know, black words are. And like this one guy, pray, brethren, you know. I just, I don't know. But I mean, that's just an old saw for me.
Do they have their back to the congregation?
No, they don't have their, well, I'll tell you what, I was very depressed last Friday night because I went to the ordination of this young seminarian, Chris Girollo, who comes to, he's from our parish, and we have dinner every so often. In fact, we have dinner next week. He was ordained a deacon. And I went to the cathedral, and I'm telling you, it's going back into pre-Vatican II time as much as possible. And I told Chris at the end, well, I didn't tell him that night, but I told him a couple of days later, I said, you know, there was no full, active, conscious participation of the faithful, but there was full, active, and conscious rejection of the Second Vatican Council. That, to me, and Frank, you pointed that out before, to me, it wasn't a prayer, it was a statement. And every time I go there, I just come away depressed and angry. I shouldn't, but I have to go. I mean, sometimes, and here I am holding the host saying, I'm so fucking mad. Save me, Jesus. Do with me what I cannot do.
Sounds like a good
You know,
prayer. Sounds like a good prayer, Gary.
There you are. But
What about the rest of the world? What
know.
about the rest of the world and Pope Francis on synodality? I
Yeah.
mean, what you're describing is so
Yeah.
depressing, but is the rest of the world on a better path than what I just heard?
You know, I'm not entirely depressed, because I think, you know, we have the 5 newly ordained here for Mass, and one of them, one thing I noticed recently with a lot of newly ordained priests, there's a bleed of the traditional Latin Mass rubrics into the Novus Ordo.
Right.
So, for example, in the rubrics of the Novus Ordo, the word elevate doesn't appear. It says show it to the people. elevators, so when you're behind your back, they could see it, so you put it up over your head. Things like that, and the kind of show that says it has the way they're being taught to some extent. The rector of the seminary was here for 2 weeks because he had his knee operated on, and a priest can come here and get nursing care and all that kind of thing. And so I took advantage of it because I've studied Pope John Paul. I'm not a huge John Paul fan, but I studied his document Pastoris Dabo Vobis. And he said there were 4 dimensions of formation: the human, the spiritual, the intellectual, and the pastoral. And he says in the very beginning that the human is the foundation of all the others. But because it's a document that lists things in a sequence, that gets lost. I mean, if there was a graphic, it would be a human base out of which the others grow. And so if you go to your local seminary, frequently you'll see that the first thing is not, the human is last in our seminary. Academic is first, which of course is not exactly an exact translation of the word intellectual, which is used in the actual document, in the Latin and in the English, actually. So I wrote this big thing up on it, and put in a little thing about nitpicking and all of that, and I gave it to him, or I sent it to him. So he hasn't reacted, but we'll see what happens. But the point is, I think what John Paul was saying here is that, in other words, if you don't have men developed with basic human social skills, then the rest of it is not going to work very well.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that, you go to seminaries all over the country, and some of them will say spiritual because we're supposed to be spiritual, we're priests after all.
Holy.
And some of them will say academic because they want everyone to think that their seminary is as good as you get in this country. And so it's this projection of what you want and ignoring what the Holy Father said. And I think that basic thing about human formation as the foundation. Now, the very first line of the paragraph, which is 43, says that without a human formation, the rest of it lacks a base. And and I think seminaries, because they don't want to read that, are really sending out some problematic people. Although I am confident in the grace of God that the people of God will be able to help some of these men really develop well.
They will.
Another link to synodality.
Yeah, you're right, John.
I mean, I certainly felt, I was in a parish up in Eureka, a parish called Sacred Heart Parish, and it was a small community, really, of people, but I always felt when I landed there, everything I had read about parish community and all that sort of was there. It was a wonderful community of people who knew how to be church, if you will, who had a lot of, I don't know, it was formal lay involved, and I don't know if they had parish council, I forget, but they were all very active and very responsive. And I always felt it would be a great first parish for a first pastor, because that parish could form that person. And I years ago just decided with these young clergy that I was beginning to meet that, I mean, if they are open and if they are committed, the people will help to form them. If not, they're going to be what they are.
Frank, did you say there were 5 priests up in Boston that were ordained this year?
Yeah.
So 5.
Yeah.
Typically in the past, how many would Boston be ordaining?
Well, depends how far back you go. I mean, you go back to the late 50s, there'd be about 50.
50.
50 to 60. Cardinal Cushing once said that he looked forward to the day when he would ordain 100 men on one day.
Wow.
But when he said that, it started to go down. Next year, there's 11.
And these are all coming out of your seminary up there, which, but
Correct.
Who's running that, your seminary up there? My understanding is it's some kind of foreign group that's leading.
No, the rector is a priest of the archdiocese who's been there teaching for 30 years. And the vice rector is a young man who just actually is quite young. He just came back from Rome a couple of years ago with a doctorate from the Greg. We, you know, and we do have other dioceses. We have some neo-cats, some religious order people. So it's not just Boston, but 5 of them were ordained for Boston.
Yeah.
Frank, the fellow who came back from the Greg, could you sense any influence of Pope Francis in his approach to community?
No.
Hmm.
Yeah, the human thing is really important, I think, because I remember when I was a young priest, when I was first ordained, and there was this old Irish lady, Mrs. O'Donovan, and she was dying. So her daughter asked if I'd come. So I went to visit. And I did, you know, I did the anointing, gave her communion. She was, you know, she was on the road. She was a couple of weeks maybe. So then I sat and I talked to her. And I may have told you this before. I said to her, where did she come from in Ireland? And she said, well, my husband came from near Cork City, but I came from a place further south, the village of Castlehaven. And I said to her, Mrs. O'Donovan, my mother and father were married in the parish of Castlehaven. I thought she was going to die right then. She got so excited. And so anyway, we talked a little bit. And afterwards, I said goodbye, and I gave her a blessing or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, a blessing. I think it was. And I'm walking out feeling, well, now I've taken Mrs. O'Donovan by the hand to the door of heaven. And she says to me before I go, Father, and she goes like this. And I said, oh, you want another blessing? I said, I gave you, but yeah, that's fine. She said, no, a kiss.
Oh, that's
Now
cool.
that's how the
That's
people
wonderful.
of God make you a human being.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I always felt that Cursillo did that for a number of priests. You know, when they went to Cursillo, they came back changed because of the, you know, the very tangible and
Right.
physical part of it as well. Yeah.
Right.
De colores.
Yeah, de colores.
Yeah.
Yeah. This
So-
group wants me to. Some of the people in the group want me to be a. I said no. I said, I'm done. I'm not going to go through 6 months of formation and then a 3.5 day deal where you get up early in the morning and throw flowers on people in their bed and stuff. I've done all that. I'm tired now. I'm gonna.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
But I just don't think the young guys are. I just don't see any pastoral or human thing. I mean, it's just all. Geez, the ordination, and I shouldn't say depressed. Well, I was sort of depressed and angry because it's a statement. But I mean, it was so glum. I mean, just glum. There was just like they can hold their hands that way for 2 hours. You know, I mean. And they all say the first Eucharistic prayer, and they all know it by heart, you know, with the bishop, and they know exactly when to make the signs of the cross. And I mean, you know that's what they've been trained into. And there's just no joy in the thing at all. And they have these nuns now that they're like 1930s nuns. It's the bishop's own little religious order, and it's like the Vatican choir. They sing the same damn thing, whether the Pope's dead or being, installed.
Tu ex Petrus.
It's the
Same damn thing over again.
it's the same thing there. It's all the Vatican. It's the same thing over and over. I just got
Gary, you drink, you ought to have one of those Negronis, I'm telling
No,
you.
well, I went home and I had two.
Good.
Deep dive.
This is your diocese, Gary?
Yeah.
This is all your
We have this
diocese.
guy, Bob, from his name is Robert Basha. He was from the Lincoln Diocese
Oh,
Yikes.
under
Yeah.
Bruskowitz.
Oh,
And then, although Bruskowitz, I know the guy was kind of anti-Vatican too, but I always heard he was a very pastoral sort of bishop. I mean, he gathered all of his priests together. And this young kid, Chris Tirolo, our bishop now sends their college seminaries to the college seminary in Lincoln. That's where our guys have gone. And Chris said that the priests of Lincoln the few times that he was involved with, he had a great spirit. I mean, I think Bruskowitz was very, very pastoral as a bishop. He just didn't like the Second Vatican Council, I guess. But Vasha came out of there and went to the Baker Diocese, and now our diocese, probably like so many dioceses, though I've been out of the loop, but it's like it's now we must be a missionary diocese again, because all we have are priests from Africa and the Philippines, and very few from Mexico now. Our bishop doesn't care for Mexicans, it looks like, but a lot of people from Africa and India and the Philippines
And Vietnam.
and we have one Vietnamese, a good friend of mine who's been here for years.
About a third of
He's
our
truly a
operating,
Vatican II priest, huh?
about a third of our operating presbyterate is not born in the United States.
No.
yeah. Here in Oakland, we have a cluster of Vietnamese as well as the local parish that I participate in.
Yeah.
He hasn't been ordained long enough to be officially canonically the pastor, but he's the resident. He operates like a pastor. This conversation, I don't know if it's just me or having listened to the Dolan piece that I sent out about the mess with regard to sexual violations and clergy, which got me depressed. And it reminded me, having said that, take a step back. I really do like Dolan. It's his message is so difficult,
Tom, Bob, you mean Bob? His name is Doyle. Tom Doyle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oil,
Yeah.
not oil. But when I saw that, I thought, oh my God, not too soon. No.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well,
Tom Doyle. Yeah.
it triggered a conversation that I had at a conference for people at the time. I was working on my PhD at Berkeley, the interface religion and psychology, and so it pulled together psychologists and clergy from a variety of denominations. And there was a not young, but a Jesuit priest who had been a gynecologist, and they basically, when he entered the Jesuit, said that might not be appropriate as a priest that you. So, like many of them, he went and studied psychiatry. And at one point during the conversation, that's what it was, a conversation during the weekend, we hit it off, and he started talking with me, and he said, because he was at that time a consultant in Rome, and this was in the 70s, the late 70s. So it goes back a way. It's before everything. Dolan, yeah, I had Doyle on the brain.
Mhm.
And he took me aside and he said, Bob, he said, you would not believe how absolutely filthy rotten the internal structure of this Roman church is, and the cover-up that is going on. he said, when this breaks, and it will break, he said, we are going to be in such trouble. This was in the 1970s, and this was before the all hell broke loose down in Louisiana. And so, but hearing Doyle yesterday, once again, just brought back, and the feeling, of how sad. Where is this? We've just finished celebrating Pentecost. Where is the Spirit? I know she's there, but where, how does she allow this to go on and continue? Or the bottom line for me is, what is she trying in the Godhead? What is she trying to teach us? What is she trying to teach us? How is she trying to get our attention, and we're not paying attention?
About when did this talk that you sent out, when did he give it?
This
What?
interview yesterday.
Whatever.
It was with a Scottish news type person. One of these, what do they call the news services that are
A podcast.
It was a
like, or something like that.
Yeah, it was a podcast.
A recent one.
Pretty recent, yes.
Because he's the one who told the bishops many, many years ago about this.
That's right.
Oh, yes. He was one of, yeah, he was one of the early alarm givers.
He was a
Listen,
Dominican
Lord.
priest. And he
That's right.
was with the Vatican guy in Washington. He was part of that whole team there. Is that the Tom Doyle you're talking about?
That's the Tom Doyle.
Yeah. And when did you send that? I don't remember getting
By
that.
the way,
but if you can
Bob
send that, please.
Bob texted it rather than emailed it.
I
Don't
find it.
look in
I
your
find
email
it.
folder, look in your text message.
You should find it in your text messages, Bob. And with a click on it, it will open it up. It was one of the weekly publications coming from Corpus Reports.
But
So
I think that since all of that, I think that the dioceses have worked very hard to stem all of that. I mean, I think from what I can gather, I mean, the things that we had to go through, as priests to go through training and accredit, and every year you'd have to, I forget what we had to do, keep our credit, whatever we as pastors, as priests had to do, we did. I mean, I think the dioceses, they've got, I think they've responded to all this. Now, if he's talking as though it's still going on, that surprises me.
Yeah, no, he does, and he just says, and it goes a lot deeper. And I know what you're saying. I did assessments for the ecumenical churches, not with Catholic priests, but he did assessment of violators over a number of years and developed a protocol along with colleagues in the kind of ministry that we were doing sorry about that. A lot happening around here today. To assess for what we call rehabilitation potential. With regard to pedophiles, there are no cures.
No. What I mean is that they put in protocols now in dioceses. I mean, like every time, like when I had to go celebrate Mass, when I went down for George's funeral, I had to produce a letter, that I was a priest good standing. I mean,
But
they're
Gary,
doing that all.
you know, we've put in a lot of protocols. I think probably kids in our parishes are safer than they have ever been.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
But,
Right,
but,
right.
but, you know, so many of the stuff that's hitting the headlines now, like, for example, that, what's his name, Rupnik, the Jesuit?
Yeah.
You know, who
Yeah.
just been uncovered or publicized, but he was the greatest artist in the Catholic Church or in Europe or whatever, official Vatican, et cetera, but he'd been doing stuff for years and years and years, that was known and was, you know, being basically ignored or covered up. Bishops in France, that's
Like-
being shown
Like
too.
McCarrick, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
McCarrick, and you know, it still seems to be the bishops now are saying, well, you know, we've engaged safeguards for children and young people at the parish level. That's all we need to do. Forget about anything else. And
Yeah.
you know, I think that there is the Doyle is right, although I haven't listened to this, but you know, the corruption at the highest levels is you know, that has hardly been addressed.
Yeah. And the bottom line is, what Gary, I hear what you're saying. What are we still missing?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. There are safeguards in a way that there never were before. And guess what? They're not working.
Yeah.
They're helpful, but a pedophile is a pedophile is a pedophile.
Right, yeah.
And it's the protocol that appears to work is the same protocol you use with regard to rehabilitation of certain criminals. The only thing that seems to work is that they have to have a connection with the equivalent of a probation officer, which was what we at the Center for Ministry would recommend to the bishop, the equivalent of the bishop in the ecumenical churches, to just say, if you are going to readmit this individual with this history, and the history that we know of, and the data suggests that you're going to miss a certain percentage of people who will never come forth for a variety of reasons. It's human nature. So there are probably many more cases. If you are going to readmit them, you have to set up a relationship with a top-notch clergy type person who can function like a probation officer.
Three.
Well, my understanding is that one strike and you're out. I mean, I don't think today, if they're not reassigned, they're not, anybody who's accused would be out, gone.
Right. That I know, and that kind of varies, I think, from bishop to bishop, even though there are protocols out there. One strike out, and stop and think about that. You know, as in, this ain't simple. You know, this really complex stuff. One strike out.
Well, you know, just last week,
You know, the thing, what's the only army in the world that regularly shoots its wounded? The Catholic Church.
you know,
I
just
hadn't heard
last
that one.
week we had the funeral of Chris Van Liefde, who was basically expelled from active ministry. I think the archdiocese still supported him, but he was, I don't know what he did. Because I was never a close friend of his, and I, you know, just exactly how he spent the last 15 or 20 years. But what I do know is, as you know, in his first assignment as a very, very young priest, he had a very brief affair with a teenager. heterosexual, and it was, you know, and that was it. There was nothing that followed him for the next 20 years. But when all of the protocols came about, he was simply barred from, just on the basis of one action that was clearly an aberration at that time, but he was out. Now, fortunately, you know, they did publicize his death, and he did have a funeral as a priest, but he wasn't ministering anywhere. So I don't know what the thing is, but that's one strike, you're out on the basis of a quote credible accusation. Heard a lot of priests too who were innocent.
Yeah, no, Norman, kind of miss him right now because he'd jump in and tell us some of the accounts
He
has shared in the past about
yeah,
about the damage that even to be, which happened to him apparently.
yeah.
And what it's like, what it feels like to live under that umbrella of suspicion,
Yeah.
even though,
You know, I think that probation officer type of thing, that resonates with me a lot. I think that would be a very, very good solution, to have an ongoing discernment about, okay, just exactly what good can this person do, recognizing the fact that, yeah, he has to be prevented from the kind of contact that's going to lead to recurrence of those problems, because it is dormant inside of him.
God doesn't give up on us. Why do we give up on ourselves?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, as a lawyer, I've always felt a certain repudiation of this credible accusation out. It just, there's no recourse whatsoever. And you know, there are a lot of guys that have been very unjustly accused, and they're gone. It's just not right. It's not right. But how do you handle such a delicate thing as the faithful's estimation of what's going on? You know, a lot of priests are very careful about offending people who are trusted contributors to the financial end of things, and likewise very sensitive to accusations. How does something become credible? 3 or 4 people are accusing, or the facts seem to coincide. It's always rubbed me the wrong way that there's such an immediate reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Doyle goes way back on this. He was a canon lawyer who was an advisor to Pio Laghi, who was the nuncio.
Yeah.
And in fact, he's kind of fast tracked himself to be a bishop.
Yeah.
But this killed his whole career. The other problem I see is, I think we're in a trap, and there's no way to get out of it. Because, if some guy down the street who does something that he shouldn't do and it becomes public, people say, well, he's kind of that way. But we've sold the priesthood as being the bridge for the faithful to God.
Mm-hmm.
And the wages of that are that the priest has to be perfect.
Yeah.
Rather than telling people we're imperfect men chosen from among men in order to deal with the things of God, but we need the people to help us ourselves get to God.
Absolutely.
So we've put ourselves in this category that when we violate it, admits of no possibility of mercy because it's so strange for a priest to have done that.
Yeah.
We don't, in other words, we come to the battle with no sword.
The only thing that you can do that you can do humanly on a pedestal is topple.
I've lost you guys.
Yeah. Yes, very, that's right.
On this,
Yeah.
on this happy note, I'm gonna bid you all adieu, and I'm probably gonna be away with family next week, but you never know, may be able to find some time to join you. Always good
Right.
to, good,
Thank
good to be
thank you,
with
Bob.
you.
Enjoy
Thank you,
your
Bob.
time.
Bye, Bob.
Blessings.
Bye.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Bob.
God bless
Bye-bye,
you.
guys.
Please
Take
do
care.
resend that Doyle piece if you would, please.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I didn't
Okay.
get it.
Okay,
Email it.
Topple.
I'll send it.
Email, yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.
It's, Bob, it's a 1 hour video.
Yes, it is.
What's the video?
Yeah.
Okay, good. No, I didn't get it at all. That
It's
I-
an interview with this Scottish guy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, it came by text rather than email, so if you could email it, that would be good.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So,
Ned, would you like to give the folks a little bit of feedback on how Ted Howard has attacked the Gospel of John compared with the first 3 Gospels?
You know, I'm not sure how he wove that in. We have a fellow classmate. His name is Theodore Howard. We've talked about him in the past. His uncle was in the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military. Another uncle who was very highly placed in the Pacific as an admiral. A very accomplished family. Had a very difficult growing up. He was in the seminary in John and Tom's and Norm's and my class, our class. He was sent to the seminary with 1 shirt, 1 pair of pants, that kind of thing. And the family was pretty wealthy. That's a little background. He's now a very esteemed Superior Court judge in Los Angeles. No, in Orange County, I'm sorry.
But Tom, Ted
Howard.
Howard, yeah.
Yeah, Theodore Howard. And
I've sent you all the book that he wrote about the seminary.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, a copy of it. That
he does stuff like that that's just wonderful. I mean, he's got about 5 books, doesn't he, John, or 6? I can't remember. And he commemorates just a whole bunch of things, reaches back, gets all kinds of pictures and data, and weaves them together, and they're just really, really fine, specimens of history and art and stuff like that. Very talented guy, very bright guy. And he's left the church. Initially, he told me he left the church because his grandmother, who finally took him out of an orphanage, he and his brother, and tried to raise him herself. And she was always connected politically with all these personages. And so he observed what she was doing and how she was doing it, and fell in love with history, of which he is very, very versed in. Anyway, he left the church because his grandmother had some kind of a near-death experience, and came back and said, "Theodore, there is nothing there." And so he concluded, this is a very bright woman, et cetera, et cetera. I love her, and she's now told me that there's nothing to hope for after we pass. He's bolstered that now. Excuse me a second. He's bolstered that by reading folks like Bart Ehrman. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with him. He has 4 or 5 series of lectures in the Great Courses, if any of you are
Yep.
familiar.
Very.
And he was an evangelical fundamentalist for a long time. Went to Princeton, got a PhD, and is now an atheist, and is saying things like,
But still a brilliant scripture scholar, which is
"Oh
amazing.
yeah, no, there's no question about it." But as I know, I mean, this is what I believe, that people take in how they're predetermined to take stuff in, and it takes a whole lot of grace or a whole lot of strong relationships to open up to other perspectives. And I don't think he has as good a scholar as he is. Anyway, Ted says, how can John be so completely, the Gospel of St. John, be so completely different from the synoptics? There has to be some kind of concurrence there, and I find none, and Ehrman finds none. There's only in John there are incidents in Jesus' life that are not in the synoptics, and so how could all this be somehow a consistent presentation of the life of Jesus? And again, he cites Elaine Pagels as one of the bases for his atheism. And Elaine Pagels is what is she, a Gnostic?
Professor of theology at Princeton.
Yeah, and again, very decorated, but a Gnostic, and
Based on the research, at least on the Gnostics, and
Yeah.
that's
yeah,
written very
The
favorably.
Gnostic gospel is her big thing.
right. So all of these distractions around the Gospels, and he just can't buy it anymore. Our Catholicism, anything about God. Does that sound familiar, John? That's as much as I can. John and I visited him this last weekend. Had a really great visit, especially because of the books that he's got, that he's created, and the history that we have, and lots of fun in the background. But
It was good. It was good seeing him at the funeral too.
Yeah. And you know what's so funny is whenever he gets to a liturgy or a rosary or some kind of prayer place, he's present, and he prays the rosary, and he responds to all of the appropriate prayers of the Mass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's must be simply cultural if he's so adamant about not believing.
And a courtesy to the rest of us, I think.
Well, maybe that too. Anyway, John,
It couldn't be that somewhere there lurks at least a taste of the grace of God.
oh, absolutely, he's generous.
Absolutely.
He's generous, and he's loving, and considerate. He was very, very solicitous of John. Going up the stairs, coming down the stairs, food, that whole thing. So I mean, he's got love inside of him.
Yes, he does.
And this rejection, at least verbal rejection, he's very, very legally structured, and hangs on, I think, to the law and to the status that he has now as what gives him worth.
I think, Ned, an example of how hurt he is by the rejection of Barney Gatlin, who was his dear friend through so many years. And the rest of us know Gatlin's a practicing priest, but he doesn't respond to any of us. Right, Tom?
Pretty much. I can't say that I've done a lot of reaching out to him. Several years ago when we were doing our sort of planning a 50th anniversary celebration, he did actually reply to my letter saying that he couldn't make it, but you know, that
A reply from Gatlin to something like that is something monumental.
yeah, I still have it framed. I think it's up there somewhere.
Maybe he might even have it framed.
Ted makes these, he's just very meticulous in anything that he does. And he's got these beautiful charcoals and pencil drawings that are just meticulous reflections of the subject. And he's got Barney all over the place. And he's got him in a central place in his home. And I remember I looked up and I said, "Oh, well, I guess you're still worshiping at the shrine of Barney Gatlin." And, you know, he responded with a kind of mixed, thing there. He loves Barney. Barney was this fantastic, you've heard Tim Elmy speak about it. He was this fantastic athlete and always also very bright, but rejecting of academics. We've talked about this in the past. He doesn't like to be with people who he wouldn't want to be in a place, our group, because we get to talking about theologians and philosophers and God knows what else we talk about, and he just doesn't cotton to that kind of conversation. He wants to be with Spanish speaking, just a little over the line of poverty folk who listen to him and love when Barney goes and hugs them. This is crazy. Why are we talking about this, John?
Well, I think we got on it from Howard. No.
From Ted, yeah. So I think he's going to heaven because he is a guy that has a lot of love in him, and generosity, etc. Go ahead.
You know,
Yeah.
I can't help but think, and I'm not a psychologist here and whatever, but I've certainly had enough experience with this on all sides. But there is some deep unhealed wound in Ted that
Oh, no. You freeze on me, you guys.
sorry about that. Are we back?
He's frozen now.
No. Am I frozen?
Ned's frozen.
I lost
frozen.
30 seconds from you guys.
Yeah, well, I keep getting a thing saying that my connection is unstable. So every once in a while, everybody freezes and then you come back and I catch in. But by the way, I've got to leave about 11:30, just so you know. I'm going to go out to lunch to my friends, the Lavios. They're a ranch out in our area. And when you go there for lunch, it's like going back to Italy. So I don't want to miss it. And it won't.
We've got about 10 minutes. And what this says to me is that people's psychological, emotional, and psychological structure really plays a huge part in taking in reality and interpreting it.
Yeah. And we are all fragile.
Yes.
And we all have areas of woundedness in our upbringing that have either created something of an active sore or at very least a scar tissue, psychological scar tissue that has possibly healed and has made us stronger.
Yeah.
But
sometimes it makes us stronger. The bone that breaks is stronger.
Yeah.
And sometimes it throws us into some hole that some never find their way out of.
Right. And that, and some wounds simply are very, very difficult to heal. And I suspect from all that you've described of Ted's upbringing he must have had to deal with a lot of
Oh.
rejection, a lot of inferiority, a lot of stuff coming at him that probably your normal childhood should not have to deal with.
The level of accomplishment of his family around him was so very high. And here he's got a mom who is an alcoholic, who leaves his father, Ted's father, marries another man who becomes a good stepfather to Ted, but still couldn't stop the mother from putting he and his brother in an orphanage. An orphanage.
Yeah.
And then the grandma takes him out of there minimally. She's got this big, huge house, you know, you know, with all of these relationships of very highly placed people. And he's just kind of watching, observing, you know, tagging along, somehow gets into the seminary. And at least the first several years in the seminary was really difficult for him to participate. And one day, I happened to be walking with him and Lou Del Castillo, and I think I've told you this before. Del Castillo was this huge athlete in high school and college, and he had his varsity jacket on with all of these patches, you know, football, baseball, basketball, particularly. And it's getting cold, and Ted's only got this thin little white shirt on. And Lou looks at him. Lou's 6'2". Of course, Ted is now 6'2", but he wasn't then. Louis takes his jacket off, puts it on Ted, says, "Here, Ted, put this on." Ted puts it on, you know. And at the end of the walk, Ted is starting to take the coat off again, or the jacket. And Lou says, "Oh, what are you doing with that? That's yours." And Theo was just almost broken to tears. Somebody like Lou did that for him. You know, so anyway.
He sounds like a really interesting person.
Yes.
I don't know if he has a sense of humor, but couple of things that occurred to me is, did he arrive at that opinion about John because he thinks that a variety of authors is not going to show a variety of differences, or because he had John on the stand and cross-examined him?
You know, we had a dinner here years and years ago. I can't, maybe 20.
I don't think that's just a joke, by the way. I think that's a relevant question.
I agree. But just this little brief thing. My son was dating his now wife, and she was in a very big, you know, corporate America is really keeping poor people poor and all that kind of stuff. And we had Mike Clements here, who was an organizer with the Industrial Areas Foundation for years and worked with low-income folk and organized them, et cetera, et cetera. And so he begins to talk to my now daughter-in-law, and she's spouting all this almost Marxist stuff back at him. And Ted said, "Now, wait a minute, Kim." And then he starts very slowly, but very meticulously asking her questions. And at the end, she's sitting there kind of shell-shocked and grabs a hold of my son, Mark, and says, "Mark, protect me." Ted is very, very, very bright and
Frank,
good.
Yeah, your question about his,
You're right, Frank.
his examining his John, Gospel of John, as an attorney. One of the things is in a trial, you're not really seeking truth. You're seeking to justify a position. a prosecutor asks a certain questions a certain way, and a defender asks questions a certain way. And you know, the lawyer would come up. It sparked some reflection on my part, because you know, if you have the Gospel of John on trial, you're one way or the other, guilty or innocent. So that's kind of my launching from the.
Especially if he's challenging what grandma told you.
Yeah.
Well, that's another factor. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't mean to psychologize, but it just the few things you've told us, they come together kind of in a funny sort of way, which would be, I think, from what you've told me, would be an interesting conversation with him.
Yeah.
Oh, you'd love it.
And Bart Ehrman, you know, I've listened to a lot of his stuff, and I've even read a couple of his books, and you know, I learned a lot from him. I think he was a tremendously good scripture scholar, but he had a chip on his shoulder. He had an axe to grind, and that came from the trauma, if you will, of the rejection of his earlier evangelical upbringing, rigid evangelical upbringing. So
Yeah.
he's coming at, I think, a very interesting position, because his research is good, but his interpretation of his research is essentially grinding his axe.
You know,
Yeah.
I've got to go, but I remember we were taking logic, and I think, wasn't there something about a fundamental, I hate to leave, but I've got to go, that there's a fundamental predisposition before you even begin to start reasoning?
Mm-hmm.
Was that the quid princip
Well, it might be.
Principitor ad modum, or it took the anticipitor?
I hate to bring this up and then go, but I've got to go. But I've been saying to myself, I just remember in logic, there was always something about a fundamental, it's not logically arrived at. It's your fundamental predisposition from which you begin.
Yeah.
Everything arises from that.
Yeah.
So the
Well,
three things are pathos, feelings,
Mhm.
logos, understanding, judging, deciding, deliberating, deciding.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's ethos, your way of life. And those things all go together, and it all starts with feeling. And also it has very much to do with the community of pathos in which you've been brought up to have conversations. So for example, what we do, we look forward to this every week. We enjoy it every week because we just feel great towards each other and about whatever happens here. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So pathos is in some sense the ground for great conversation.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful gift to be able to feel this way.
Yes.
And
No.
the trust is such a big part of it, isn't it?
And I'll say, thank you for the gift.
Oh, you gotta go. Bye.
Thank you for your gift, Gary.
Thank
Take
you.
care. God bless.
Pasta is better.
Yeah, the antipasta, he's gonna get the whole deal, right to the grappa.
I won't miss it. I won't I'll come home, take a big nap. Yeah.
Bye. Ciao.
God bless.
Ciao.
Oh, that was great.
Fred, is there, do you know of any book that, or lecture or set of lectures or something that really kind of ties all the stuff that you were saying together?
Well, it's funny because I just finished writing an article for the Lonergan workshop on synodality.
Oh,
And it comes up in there. So I'll send it to you guys.
please.
Oh, that's great.
Thanks,
Yes.
Jeff.
That'd be
When is the
wonderful.
workshop this year, Fred?
Pardon?
When is the workshop?
It starts on the 20th.
Okay.
And it's in room 426 in some hall. I can't remember which, I'm sorry. But
It's 4
I
days from
can
now.
find out and let you know. And also, I think it can be zoomed.
Okay.
I think it will be zoomed.
Yeah, yeah, because I remember last year Jeff Blecko responded to one of the things you said, and I saw that on Zoom, yeah.
Oh, right. Great. Okay, I'll check that out. Make sure you're linked.
Yeah, if you could send us the link and the program schedule, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Will do.
Frank, I want to apologize if I came on too strongly about the Eucharistic thing.
No, I mean, I don't think in this kind of roundtable discussion, I don't think coming on strong about anything is, necessitates any kind of an apology. I'm thick-skinned enough to say that if you get into it, you get into it.
So we're still friends.
No, but I appreciated what you were saying, because I was thinking just the opposite.
Yeah.
With respect to afterwards. And it could be because this thing was so built up with candles everywhere, and the monstrance was overdone. The cope, like I said, look, it came from some
Precisely.
functionary at Westminster Cathedral, Westminster Abbey. And I know how this guy thinks, so
And
that
the
was
proportionality. Similarly, today they're celebrating the solemnity of the Sacred Heart of Jesus at our
Right,
cathedral,
right.
and the whole concentration of the celebration is the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and the LA Dodgers,
Yeah.
and that shit.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about shit. Gee.
Put too fine a point on it.
They've got this a video of a cross. Have you seen this? And there's a man leaning on it, and his arms are out. And then they've got another guy who's got a little loincloth wrapped around his privates, and he's a very flexible guy, and he's like a snake, just weaving himself around the cross and the man who's there, and just and this is a proclamation of Thanksgiving to these people who call themselves Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, and the Dodgers are I think it's tonight. The Dodgers have them as a showpiece to thank for all of the good things they do for the LGBTQ.
Walter O'Malley is turning in his grave.
Grave.
But I kind of fear that the Archdiocese of LA and the self-righteousness of the bishops throughout the country are giving them just an immense amount of free publicity.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
And Gomez, he just said, we're saying nothing about this. All we're doing is repairing and praying.
Right. Yeah.
They were invited. I'm sure you all know this. They were invited to Dodger Stadium for this award, and then people, rose up and spoke against it. So they disinvited them, and then the other side rose up, and so they re-invited them. This is
a disaster. Yeah.
Is this something they do every year, or is this?
No. Well, they have a lot of awards, but this kind of award for these kinds of folks, not so much these kinds of folks, but the manifestation of their regard for sisters and the church is just ugly as hell.
The Dodgers stance. Who's stance?
No,
I think public relations point of view was silly for the Dodgers to get into this at all.
Amazingly dumb.
Yeah, I think the Angels are getting into it too. There's, you
I,
know,
I remember the days when there was a special day at Fenway Park when Cardinal Cushing would take all of the nuns in the archdiocese to the baseball game.
wow. Well, now that's not, nobody's making fun of anybody.
So maybe that's what they should do. Maybe Archbishop Gomez on the night of the award should invite all the nuns in the archdiocese to come to the baseball game.
I think Gomez couldn't match our Cardinal Cushing.
No.
Men should.
No.
Cushing had cojones, Oh, Lord. Hey, this isn't it a phenomenon where the tail is wagging the dog? Just generally, politically speaking, for the Democrats, I used to be a staunch Democrat. Nothing was ever going to knock me out of that category, but I'm out of there now. It's crazy. Anyway, yeah.
Well, I suppose it's a useful distraction from having the former president of the United States, indicted on so many counts. When that little guy from Cape Cod is in jail and will be there probably for the rest of his life for doing essentially the same thing.
Wow.
Oh, what was the guy from Cape Cod?
He was a reservist in Cape Cod, and he had some access to secret documents, and he shared them with all his friends. Yeah, Teixeira is his name. Yeah, he's a 28-year-old kid from Fall River. So.
The Dodgers is actually having a Christian Faith and Family Day on July 30th.
Well,
and I think that they have had a church-related family day. In fact, I think they've had Catholic night at the Dodgers, in the past.
Yeah, we had that in Boston.
Well, Vin Scully was a very public Catholic.
Yeah, he was a devout Catholic. Yeah.
Charlie Blaney, remember?
Yeah, amen. You guys were in the same class, weren't you, Fred?
Oh, he was ahead of me.
Was he?
So it'll be interesting to see who's leading that, Tom. Is it Jose or is it Rick Warren?
I have no idea.
I don't think Jose's near.
Rick Warren may, since he's been thrown out of the Southern Baptist.
Yeah. He
may bring his group into. Well, I don't think he'll bring them in. I don't think he'll make them Catholic because we have the same rejection of female pastors.
Well, Bishop Van, the Bishop of Orange, allied himself with Warren quite tightly for a good couple of years and has now begun to distance himself from him. But Warren and Van together appeared talking about abortion and mental health and stuff like that.
Why are they separating now?
I don't know.
What's the division?
Don't know. Maybe it's just Van getting old and not knowing.
Well, the same thing is happening with Warren. Warren is fading a little bit.
That's right. He's
getting older. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Van, in the process, have invited a lot of kind of Warren type allies, if you will, like the Augustine Institute, Matthew Kelly for the Dynamic Catholic. They're all locating in the campus of the Crystal Cathedral, the Cathedral. Christ the King, is that what it's called now?
Christ Cathedral.
Yeah.
However, you look at the origin of that cathedral, and Protestant megachurches that seem to be based on a particular personality,
right?
Tend not to have a lot of longevity after their founder.
Well, toward the end, we at the IAF had some workshops on campus there, and it had deteriorated just terribly. Rooms that were not painted and and wallpaper that was falling off, and the statues that weren't being kept up. He's got some great statues on campus. Jesus laughing, with little children, and they're just wonderful. But it really began to deteriorate, and I guess Van saw an opportunity. Oh,
there's probably, it would make it a good discussion sometimes, sit around with a few beers and to come up with some even more appropriate places to have a statue of Jesus laughing.
That same statue is at the priest's house of prayer, and Jesus is surrounded by little kids. He's sitting down and laughing with them, and I just can't help but look at that statue and say, it looks an awful lot like he's grooming them.
Oh, geez.
that particular statue.
How deep that shit has gone to us. Oh my God.
That's what you get for being in California.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a rather, I can't remember his name, but he's a rather popular sculptor. And he's the one also who did the famous homeless Jesus.
Yeah.
Where
lying on a bench.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
but
cool.
you see the nail marks in his feet.
Yes, yeah. They've got one of those up at Cambria. And you go to Cambria pretty often, Tom.
Yeah.
Church up there.
Yeah, there's a church there. I've seen that, yeah.
Ned or Tom, did Bishop Barnes shed any light on what we're talking about, or did he avoid those?
With respect to what, Tom?
With respect to the chemistry among the bishops and the cardinals?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
No.
You
What's the
guys
question?
interested me in
Cardinals?
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, what was your question about bishops and cardinals?
Did Bishop Barnes share at the celebration for George Crook any of that, or did he just not get involved?
Any of, you mean the stuff with the Dodgers, or
with any of the chemistry among the differences of bishops and cardinals? And I think I'm very concerned about so much rejection of Pope Francis by U.S. senior clergy.
Yeah, Strickland is having something in Texas today also.
He's having something at Dodger Stadium. Isn't there a protest at Dodger Stadium and he's involved in it?
Oh, is it Georgia? Okay,
yeah.
I thought it was
Strickland. Yeah.
What's it a protest about?
Well, about the nuns.
Oh,
the award to the nuns.
Yeah.
Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Jeez. No, by the way, Barnes is very circumspect about stuff like that.
At least with a name like that, they're not. We know they're not Lutherans.
Yeah, I don't know.
You guys, we had a discussion one time, and you introduced Fleming Rutledge.
Yes.
And I found a book by her on the crucifixion.
It's a great book.
It is, yeah.
Hard to read.
Yeah, it was 600 pages on the crucifixion, but nice. I did figure that it's payback for a little lopsided resurrectionist. And but it is very well done. But it's there's a great deal of Anglican theology in it, if you will. I've come to think that we Catholics have benefited from both ends, because we have the Paschal mystery, and the Anglicans are still trying to decide whether they're Lutherans or Catholics.
Yeah.
You know, whether or not they're formed by the crucifixion or whether or not they're formed by the resurrection, when we've come to the conclusion is that it's one Paschal mystery.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that's true of everything, but there's a hint of that in the first 100 pages or so that she's written.
They, the books written by Rutledge and N.T. Wright.
Oh, N.T. Wright.
Do you like him? I like him a lot.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, N.T. Wright is good, really good. His book on Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple. But you know, down at the bottom, I remember having a long conversation that got quite angry at one point at Salesian High School, somewhere around 11 o'clock at night, up in a counselor's room, George and me. He was saying that people who are appropriately successful and relational do not let their feelings ever get in the way of reason. And I was
Thank you very much.
on the other side of the argument. I'm looking forward to reading Fred's piece.
You'll be sorry.
With respect to that, you know, we're talking.
Oh, my.
What has happened to George? Is he going to be back with us for these conversations? at all?
I just got an email from him that he had a vet's appointment with Moby
Moby.
this morning.
Oh, I hope that's not.
He says we'll catch up with you via YouTube. So Moby is seeing the doctor.
Who's Moby?
His
His
dog.
dog.
His dog.
Yeah, he loves his dogs. He's really.
I'm now jealous. What can I say?
My wife and I are looking for a dog right now.
My daughter just got one, Megan, whom you've met.
Mhm. The lake.
She had a dachshund for 16 years because they're so small, they live long. And she just got a new breed of dachshund where the dog is like 3 pounds at this point, but it looks like either a Cocker Spaniel or a Golden Retriever, rather than, you know, the black and brown, you know, that usually. So
What's your son's name?
my son,
Yeah.
Chris,
Oh, good.
he just
I
landed
pray-
in Korea yesterday.
I pray for you and them every night.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate it, especially given the fact I'm nervous about him, you know, being in Korea for the next 9 months in the army. You know.
Oh, boy.
He's a doctor.
Yeah, he's a medical doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. Why would Korea be a matter of concern?
Well, only because that area of the world is beginning to heat up a little bit,
Yeah, big time, I think.
There is, yeah.
and that's not connected. I mean, his brigade is replacing one that was there, so it's not, you know, kind of a ramping up, if you will. But there's a little bit of that going on because Taiwan and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So,
Mm.
In North Korea.
yeah. Well, North Korea has been doing that stuff for 40 years, so it's. But Xi Jinping says that his term, which ends in about 3 or 4 years, he doesn't want to hand on the Taiwan problem to the next person.
So how do you interpret that?
Well, that they'll make a serious effort to take it back in the next 3 or 4 years.
Oh, I'm afraid so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Ukrainian thing is giving them some pause in terms of the strength of the pushback.
Hmm.
He's not just on a term that's likely to end, though. My sense is they've positioned Xi Jinping to, he's just going to be there until he dies. It's what it
Well,
appears to me.
technically, he was reelected to a new 5-year term about a year and a half ago. Now, there might be another 5 after this.
Yeah.
Well, if he's smart, he's engineering a clone to take over
That one.
privately. Which he may be smarter than the other ego-driven authoritarian idiots like well, Trump is an obvious one, but Erdogan is the, to my mind, the
guy in Hungary.
and the guy in
Yeah.
Turkey, I don't think he has any sense of anybody else being able to lead Turkey to where it needs to be except himself, and so he's going to keep himself in there forever.
Well, he just got reelected, but only by 52% of the vote.
Which was
That's-
engineered.
And in a runoff,
Mhm.
he didn't win enough to win on the first go round.
Yeah.
So there's significant opposition in the country. I think.
Oh, there is. But he has ways of dealing with that.
Yeah. 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 I've known a few high-level ecclesiastics who had the same gift.
I have a certain interest in that, at least personally, and to a certain extent theoretically, because I always used to visit. I mean, I've been to Turkey about 12 times now. And,
Oh, really? Wow.
and the last 2 times was in conjunction with an organization that's affiliated with the Gulen movement.
Uh-huh.
And of course, he regards them as terrorists. They're not. They are not. Emphatically, they are not. But they are his bête noire. And I am reasonably sure that the fact that I was associated with them and went to Turkey twice in conjunction with one of their study tours, which they organized for priests in the archdiocese, that my name would come up if I tried to get a visa.
Right.
In the olden days, you'd get the visa at the airport in Istanbul, and you could be, turned back in the airport. At least now you have to get it through your consulate. But so
I was there once, and it's an interesting place. It was when I was in Rome. We went there once, and we called up the patriarch, see if we could visit with him, and he received us the next morning. So
That's very good.
it was very interesting. It was Athenagoras, I think, was the patriarch at the time.
Yeah, I've met Patriarch Bartholomew twice.
Yeah. This was before Bartholomew, I think. Yeah.
Taking our groups there.
Yeah.
Very, very gracious person. Yeah.
They live like in a ramshackle old complex on a back street in Istanbul.
Yeah.
What draws you to Turkey so regularly or so often? 12 times is a lot.
Yeah.
Well, beginning around 2005, in 2005, I took a 2-month sabbatical study tour there. And it was an early Christian world study tour under the auspices of Collegeville. And I just became so enamored with this concept of Turkey actually being, as Pope Benedict has said on a number of occasions, the holy land of the church. And the history of the the apostolic, really, development of the church for the first 7 centuries focused far more on Turkey, what we now know as Turkey, than it did on Rome. So, and that's virtually unknown. So, you know, I thought this would be a really, really interesting subject to organize a pilgrimage around. So for
Do they
good
spaghetti
number
al carbonara?
Say it again, Fred.
Do they have spaghetti alla carbonara?
no, but Turkish cuisine is marvelous. So
Somewhere recently, Tom, I
Pardon?
got the impression that they're still uncovering documents even to this time.
well, they're doing a
documents-
lot of archaeological work. Documents is one thing, but you know, in some ways, the documents in stone. During the time that I was actively there, Laodicea, for example, or they would call it Laodicea, went from being an unexcavated mound to a very well-developed museum sort of archaeological site. And during the time that I was there, they also discovered, just across the valley from there, the tomb of Saint Philip. So there's a lot of archaeological work that really is going on, and is continuing to go on there. But it was, you know, it was just fascinating, leading people, maybe anywhere from 20 to 30 people at a time, to explore these particular places where, you know, our faith had its childhood, if you will.
Are those archaeologists coming from around the world?
They are. There's a good number of them who are Turkish, and you know, therefore Muslim, but they are very, you know, eager to uncover the heritage, the wide-ranging heritage of Turkey. Turkey has one of the most ancient Neolithic sites called Çatalhöyük, and recently I've been to Çatalhöyük many times, but another one that was right at the center, almost the epicenter of the recent earthquake, called Göbekli Tepe, where they, you know, uncovered contemporary with Çatalhöyük religious monuments of, you know, showing signs of a like 10 centuries before Christ, or 10 millennia before Christ, I'm sorry. The, you know, religious worship, a sort of basically a temple with carvings and so on. So it's a very complex, fascinating subject. But
Understandable, yeah.
It wasn't always quite as, I mean, Erdogan has really brought Islam much more strongly into the government and the society than I think Ataturk would have wanted.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Ataturk was
Secularist.
well, yeah, he was sort of, he had to be sort of tolerant of Islam, but
Right.
his ideal was a very secularist Turkey, modeled, you know, modeled kind of after France and to a certain extent Germany. But the European models, I think he was after, probably predated World War I.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. The other thing is, you know, after World War I, the victorious allies carved up the entire Middle East, and Ataturk prevented them from carving up Turkey.
Yeah.
Their maps had lines drawn all over Turkey for who was going to control what part.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
he simply they had to fight for it. But the Treaty of Lausanne, I think it was, established basically legitimized the Republic of Turkey. And of course, during the World War I years, the Armenian genocide happened, which is still does have two sides to it, but it was a genocide.
Yeah, right.
Maybe you can give us a little workshop next week.
Oh, that would take too much preparation for me now.
That's okay. We'll trigger with questions, Tom.
Yeah.
One of, to me, one of the interesting things behind that whole Armenian genocide question was the Ottoman Empire controlled the Bosporus, which was at that time Russia's only warm water access to the Mediterranean. And Russia was, back under the Tsars, was lusting after gaining control of that outlet from the Black Sea. And they were continually trying to fight for it. And I think one of the things that they were trying to do is to use the Armenians as sort of a back door to get into basically to get into Turkey, to be able to take over from the Ottomans the Bosporus, which I think is one reason why the Ottoman Empire in Turkey sided with the British in World War I against the Russians. No, I'm sorry, sided with the Germans against the Russians. The Russians sided with. Now I'm getting all confused. Sorry.
Do your homework and tell us more next week.
That happens right about noontime, doesn't it, Tom?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's part of the clock, but it is noontime. Shall we call it a?
Yeah, 12:05.
It's
Wow.
3 o'clock in the afternoon here.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's time
I
for
gotta
a
run.
nap.
Well, that's not a bad idea, Tom.
I don't care which language. I hope you'll close with the prayer, Tom.
Let's close with a prayer. Shall we do Latin or?
However you want.
Oh, dear Lord, thank you for this gathering. As always, we feel so much the power of your Holy Spirit gathering us together, drawing us together in fraternal love. And it's wonderful fraternity and communication that we all share. We thank you, and we ask that we may be able to go forth from this time renewed, enriched, and energized to each in our own way be faithful servants of your kingdom. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen. Thank
Okay.
you all.
God bless you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
God bless. Take care.